This is Walmart's cheapest brand new Windows laptop, and today we're going to find out what you actually get for $179. Hey everyone, Retro Tech Dad here, and I'm back this week with another budget experiment. This time around I've got a laptop here which was delivered not too long ago from Walmart.com, and basically I wanted to find the cheapest Windows laptop on the website. And this is similar to a video I did not too long ago where I challenged myself to find the cheapest Windows tablet on Amazon.com, and so now I'm back with this Walmart special. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? For this experiment, there were a few things I wanted to accomplish, so I wanted to find the cheapest laptop, but it had to be brand new, so not a refurbished or open box unit. It had to be sold directly from Walmart, so obviously not a third-party seller. And of course, it has to be in stock and readily available. There were a few laptops that met this criteria, but the last one that I wanted to look for specifically was a Windows-based laptop, and not the usual Chromebooks. So I stumbled across this HP 14-inch HD Windows laptop. Well, it goes without saying that I obviously ordered the laptop, and so one day later the laptop arrived straight from Walmart.com, which is pretty wild considering it was shipped free straight to my door. So let's get this box opened up and take a look inside, and yes, it was shipped just like this with the label slapped right on the laptop's packaging. It's not a very exciting package, and I wasn't really expecting a top-tier unboxing experience given the price point, and clearly this is not a priority when considering the segment. Now about that price, this laptop is available on Walmart's website for $179 brand new, and is a bit interesting to me since it's not the usual sort of laptops, tablets, and desktops that you might see occupy this space with something like a Celeron processor or some type of Chromebook or cheap Android device. Instead, what we get here is an AMD Athlon Silver 7120U, and this is a curiosity since it is part of AMD's 6nm Mendocino lineup, based on the Zen 2 architecture and very similar to the one that I looked at in the early days of my channel. But for that specifically, I examined its stronger sibling, the Athlon Gold 7220U. The silver variant found in this HP laptop is definitely the weakest out of AMD's Mendocino lineup, and so I have very tempered expectations, despite the surprising performance out of the Gold 7220U version. This does have AMD Radeon 610M graphics with only 2 CUs, and it's the same as the rest of the Mendocino lineup. So I noticed the Walmart listing on the website is actually incorrect, as on the box it shows that we get 4GB of LPDDR5 RAM, which does make a bit more sense, and not the 4GB of DDR4 that is stated on the website. Either way, we are looking at another potato like that Fujitsu that I just looked at recently with just 4GB of RAM in 2026. There's a 128GB M.2 NVMe drive for internal storage, so at least we're not stuck with eMMC storage, and I will take a look under the hood in a little bit, but most likely don't expect much there. We do get a 14-inch HD LED display at a whopping resolution of 1366 by 768 with 250 nits max brightness, and unsurprisingly a very unexciting screen, which I was expecting for the price and this type of setup. This might come as a shock, but probably not given the specs I just read off, but it's easily the worst part of this entire setup for me, with pretty terrible color accuracy, viewing angles, resolution, and just overall quality. I do get that it's a cheap new laptop, but there's gotta be a palette somewhere with a slightly better display. Okay, let's pull this laptop out, and I will say that it feels pretty thin and surprisingly light, which is nice. The laptop comes with a small sized power adapter that uses a barrel jack connector, and I did confirm that this laptop does not support USB-C charging, so you will need to make sure you have that power adapter handy. HP has very kindly included some setup instructions and, interestingly, an insert from Walmart thanking you for the purchase of this HP laptop, and this makes me think that there's some agreement here with HP and Walmart to subsidize some of the cost of this laptop, as this configuration is the cheapest that I've seen from the major retailers. Alright, enough of that, let's get to the goods, and as you can see, it's pretty thin, and we're going to get a look at this pretty nice looking color. The plastic sleeve has been removed, and it's time to get a look at this HP fresh out of the box. Again, I'm pretty impressed by the weight and just how thin this unit is, and we've definitely come a long way from the chunky budget netbooks of the past. The top portion is pretty slick looking with this really attractive color, and it definitely looks a bit more expensive than one might think. Obviously everything here is plastic, but it does feel really nice, and I actually like the texture on the bottom portion of the laptop. So let's open up the lid for the first time, and I'll say this looks pretty nice. The keyboard feels surprisingly solid to type on, And this also has a very interesting texture on the keycaps that makes it a bit different than some of the budget laptops that I've seen in the past. The keys are all nicely spaced and very quiet to type on. By the way, that hinge is just okay, and I fully expected needing to hold down the base in order to lift up the lid, which is typical on a cheap laptop like this, and unsurprisingly, it doesn't open up without raising that base. The trackpad is probably the second worst part of all of this. It's not completely terrible since it is sized decently, but the mouse clicking is really rough, and it almost sounds like the plastic is grating against the shell at times. Alright, so let's power this on, and as expected, the laptop is in a deep sleep mode, so I will have to grab that power adapter and quickly plug it in so we can get this turned on for the first time. And yes, this does ship with Windows 11 Home in S mode, and it's probably not much of a surprise for regular viewers of the channel that I will be nuking this install of Windows 11, as I don't think it's a great match for a limited spec device like this HP laptop. I did my usual thing where I just bypassed the Windows 11 setup for a local account. Surprisingly, two of the commands I usually use to get into a local account didn't work since I couldn't get the command prompt to come up on screen. And so I had to resort to a different method which lets you boot into an administrator account. And so at least by doing that, we can poke around very quickly and just see what ships with this out of the box. As always, it does look like we get our usual Microsoft junk, but there are a few additional items preloaded here. The most interesting is the Walmart shopping app, which goes back to that insert we saw earlier. And again, there's no doubt that there's some type of subsidy and relationship between HP and Walmart that's happening here. So it's time to say goodbye to Windows, but before I do that, I did want to go under the hood, which probably isn't much of a surprise for my regular viewers. This will give us an opportunity to just quickly check things out and see if anything is user upgradable. This is a very simple laptop to get into, and it only requires removing 4 screws and then gently nudging a pick in between the body and the bottom panel, which is very easy to separate. Bada bing, bada boom, and now we have that bottom cover removed. There's nothing too exciting going on here, and the first thing that I do see is that M.2 drive, which surprisingly, they're using a smaller 2230 form factor, and the good news is that we do have room for a larger 2280 drive, and just as a reminder, this only includes 128GB of storage, and so I'll be looking to swap it out in just a moment. Let's take a closer look at the heatsink and RAM setup, and I will not be doing anything here as this is a brand new laptop, and honestly I'm not worried about thermals, especially with this chip which doesn't really draw a lot of power. Other than that, it's all pretty standard with a decent sized fan that I will say is very quiet when it's under load, and beside that, the wireless chip which does appear to be removable, and finally the battery that also can be replaced if needed. So let's go back to the M.2, and I happen to have an old 1TB 2280 drive lying around, which actually makes things easier for me when it comes to testing, since 128GB is really tough to work with when it comes to installing and just getting things all loaded up. The swap is super simple, and now that that's done, let's go ahead and get it all back together and say goodbye to Windows for real. So for this go around, I decided on using the Linux-based distro ZorinOS, and I do want to thank everyone for sharing some of your favorite distros in my other video covering that $68 Fujitsu tablet. I don't have a whole lot of commentary here, the install went very smooth and there's no hardware issues, and everything is compatible right out of the box, and so here we are in ZorinOS. I do like this distro as it's very clean and easy to navigate, and so I think it's fairly user-friendly and accessible, and will definitely help squeeze a bit more out of this very underpowered laptop. And so for those that might be using this for school or maybe just simple tasks like web browsing, email, and whatnot, I think this is a nice option. So let's do what we do best here and dive into some PC gaming, and while I'm not expecting a whole lot here with a brand new laptop that costs $179, I think it will be interesting to see how far we can push this Athlon Silver 7120U. And I will say that when I looked at the Athlon Gold 7220U back in the day, I was very surprised by its performance and actually came away running a lot more than expected. And so I had to revisit that older video of mine and just refresh myself on the kinds of games that I was able to get away with. Now there are a few things that are working against this laptop with the Athlon 7120U, which first and foremost does include the very limited 4GB of RAM. The other limitation is that while this is a Mendocino Athlon chip, this variant is cut down even further from the Athlon Gold 7220U. So not only does this have slightly lower clock speeds, but it only has 2 physical cores with 2 threads compared to the 4 threads with the 7220U, and also has half the L3 cache of the 7220U. It's very obvious that these things are all making a difference because games that I was able to run over on that old 7220U laptop from back in the day was able to play games like Forza Horizon 5 and run it better than expected, whereas here with the 7120U, the game will just lock up and crash. I even tried the older Forza Horizon 4, and the game locked up when I launched the benchmark and then proceeded to lock up the entire system. So it started to become obvious to me that we needed to really dial back expectations and really engage that potato mode style of gaming. And that's okay, because the goal of this experiment is to see what kind of gaming we can actually get away with using a $179 laptop that is brand new, and based on its popularity on the Walmart website, I imagine that many will end up with a machine like this for various reasons, and the good news is that there are experiences that do work pretty well here. You've probably noticed I've had a few games running so far for this segment, and yes, of course, it does run Doom. But if Doom can run on a toaster, then of course it can run here. Now definitely older games like Half-Life 2, Borderlands, and Ori and the Blind Forest will run quite well, but I did manage to get some newer stuff on here like Vampire Crawlers and Game Bonanza, which I've been absolutely addicted to both of these, and these are the types of games that will most likely do very well on an underpowered system like this. So how about some Megabank, which is another game that I've been addicted to and play on and off since it came out last year, which runs surprisingly well here even when things were getting crazy and hectic on screen. The beauty is that the PC library is vast and filled with many games that will run here, and just as I said for that Fujitsu tablet, with its very underpowered Celeron, it's all about changing your mindset and perhaps tackling your backlog of unplayed games or just focusing on older and lighter experiences. But there's still plenty of gaming that can be done here, and so if you end up with one of these, not all is lost. And if that's not enough, how about some emulation, which will certainly add value to a cheap laptop like this, since it will further open up the hardware to even more experiences that can be enjoyed here. So let's get out of the way what it will not do so well, and for sure Switch emulation is not really going to happen here outside of the absolute, and I mean absolute lightest games. The same goes for Xbox 360 emulation, and that's probably in an even worse position than Switch emulation. Now surprisingly, some lighter PS3 games with RPCS3 will do fairly well here, so lighter PSN style games like one of my personal favorites, Resogun, actually does okay at the native 720p resolution of the PlayStation 3, especially once the shader compilation completes, and then some other lighter games like Dragon's Crown will do well here. I'd say that Wii U is the highest end emulation that will actually do better than expected, and it definitely is the one that surprised me the most. Now I typically start out with a game like DuckTales Remastered just to get a feel for where we might stand with Wii U emulation, but it was running very well at the default resolution, so I decided to go with something a bit more demanding, and even a game like Mario Kart 8 actually runs pretty dang well for a very underpowered laptop like this. It's definitely the upper end of what we can realistically expect, but this does hit almost 60 frames per second at times, and I did drop the resolution down to 960 by 544 to help stabilize it a bit. But I will say that I was not expecting this at all. So how about the 6th generation of consoles like GameCube and PlayStation 2? Let's start with GameCube first, using the Dolphin emulator since this is easily the best performing out of all the consoles that I've shown so far, and GameCube runs very well here with this laptop. I've got Wave Race Blue Storm set to 3 times the native resolution of GameCube, which is the equivalent of 1080p, and I'd say that a lot of the GameCube library will perform decently. The same goes for Wii, using the Dolphin emulator, and Wii can be a bit more demanding, but despite this, performance is really good with Dolphin, and I'm running both Sonic Colors and Donkey Kong Country Returns at that same 3 times native resolution of the Wii, and both these games run well with just minor drops here and there. But with this amount of upscaling, I'd say that Wii is likewise going to be a solid performer for most titles. Finally, I just saved PlayStation 2 for last, and compared to GameCube and Wii performance, I was not as impressed here. Something like God of War 2 did not run at full speed, at least using just the native resolution of the PlayStation 2, even with the PAL version. Not all is lost, since something like Burnout Revenge fared pretty well, and you can either stick with the NTSC version and run it at native resolution, or go with the PAL ROM, which lets us squeeze out some upscaling at 2 times the native PlayStation 2 resolution. I'd say for PS2, definitely expect less performance, and so obviously the entirety of the PS2 library will not be possible here, but given how many games there are on the platform, plenty will work well enough. It goes without saying that older platforms like PlayStation 1, Dreamcast, and even PSP will all fare well here, so again, there's plenty to explore when it comes to emulation, especially when going a bit more retro. So we've reached that point of the video where it's time to wrap things up, and with all of that, I think it's safe to say that this laptop is cheap for a reason. There were many corners cut to reach that $179 price point, and while it's incredible that a brand new laptop can be purchased for that amount, I think it goes without saying that if you're able to, something like an older second-hand laptop might be the way to go even during Grandpocalypse. This was definitely an interesting experiment, and at least I was able to check out how the weakest Mendocino chip performs from AMD, and it's sadly pretty underwhelming compared to its more powerful siblings. I hope you enjoyed this look at Walmart's HP Windows laptop, and until the next video, as always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.